Yes, thank you. Well, firstly, we'd just like to thank Bundaberg Fruit and Veggie Growers for providing this platform for this presentation. Basically, what we're going to talk about is the heavy vehicle national law. And who we have here is we have Jonathan and Mark, who are former directors of a mining company. They're going to talk about the experience they've had, particularly with the obligation for executives, people like directors, to comply with their due diligence obligations. So I'm going to hand over to the guys now to run through a brief PowerPoint about their experience and what they have learned.
Okay. Right, well, thanks, Liam. And thanks, Mr. Chairman and directors for having us here. This allows us to fulfil one of our obligations under an enforced undertaking that we agreed to with the NHPR, but it also, on a practical basis, allows us to disseminate a message which I think is quite important for small groups like your members. And so there's some real practicality there, hopefully in understanding what we went through and then trying to avoid that for your members. So we're actually here as part of what's called an enforced undertaking. So we went to court with the NHPR, and as a settled outcome, they agreed to drop the charges for an incident that we had with respect to our site in return for several activities that were part of an enforced undertaking. This is the last of those activities. So I'll go through the background, the accident itself, the allegations by the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator, and then hand over to Jonathan. He'll go through the impact and the lessons that we got out of it, hopefully the lessons that your group can take away as well. So,
Mark, just before we go on, I might just say is that a few technical issues getting the presentation up on this screen here. So we've got another presentation there that will follow from Liam. So I'll put it up on the small screen here, but we'll make available a copy of that presentation for you and for dissemination amongst your members as you see fit. We've got some hard copies too, so that's this issue, so there's a few more that we can hand around.
So the presentation won't be on that screen?
No, this will just be the final presentation from Liam.
And so the viewers on the screen.
Online viewers, yes.
Okay, excellent. Okay, well, the background is we were both directors of a company called Clipchamp Resources Private Limited, which was a wholly owned subsidiary of a group called Melior Resources, which is a TSXV listed entity. So it was listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange in Canada. Clipchamp was its only asset, so that was its sole asset. And Clipchamp was restarting the Clipchamp ilmenite project outside of Toronto. That project had been operating on and off since 2006. In fact, this was the third attempt to restart it. So there had been quite a bit of experience in digging stuff out of the ground, processing and hauling the material from Clipchamp to Port Gladstone. So in 2018, the operations restarted following an extended shutdown and some major plant upgrades, and had an expected life of I think about 15 years and an average turnover of about $30 million per year. So that was the scale of things with about 50 employees. So it was quite a small scale with respect to a mining operation. But quite a sophisticated operation that's adhered to all the appropriate mining legislation with respect to on-site activities. We thought they were pretty good. I'll get to that in a minute. We did, the mine site was at the Clipchamp crater just outside Monto, and we had to haul ilmenite, about 160,000 tonnes a year, from the mine site down the Clipchamp road, which was actually quite a third grade road. It was sealed in some areas and unsealed in other areas, and our responsibility was to maintain that road, but it wasn't our road. And then the trucks got onto the main highway, turned left, went through Monto, up over the canyon, the range there, through Middlewiller and on to the port there. That's about 180 kilometres. the haulage operations. And upon recommencing, we engaged several groups to haul product to the port on a casual basis, basically to assess the capability of those groups. We're a small operation ourselves. We were comfortable with operating with other small contractors, so we could be like for like. We didn't think it was an operation for the tolls of the world, so we're quite happy with smaller local outfits. And that's the approach we took for the haulage contractor. The contractor that was involved in this incident was an owner operator, and he engaged a team of subcontractors to manage the mine schedule, with the view to putting on his own people and building up his own capabilities over time. This particular contractor had previously worked for us as a subcontractor on previous operations of the mine, and had done a very good job. So we were quite comfortable with him and the way he operated, and hence that was a big tick in his favour with respect to getting the contract for this latest incarnation of haulage. He was from the local community. He knew the unique conditions of the road all the way through to the port. I think he was based in just out of Gladstone there, but he wasn't a sophisticated business. He was an owner operator, and the purpose, we had him on a trial period. The purpose of the trial period was not only to assess the contractor, but to develop an appropriate commercial engagement that properly aligned his operations with the operations of the mine site. So that was the background of the activity.
He was to manage the mine schedule, but he wasn't doing the mining.
No, he wasn't doing any of the mining.
Right.
We were doing all the mining ourselves. All he was doing was picking up the product at the mine site, loaded into it, run over our weighbridge, and then he was charged with getting the product from the mine site to the port and loading it there. And we had someone else looking after the port and managing the product at the port. So it was strictly from pickup to dump off at the port.
Yeah, so the schedule that he would have managed would be the number of trucks that he would need to meet the tons that we find that we needed to move for a given period of time.
Right.
And so Gunican Resources background, and I think this is an important point, not necessarily from our point of view, but from like-minded small businesses who think that their safety is in good shape and not cowboy operators. So we actually thought that we were had a very strong safety culture, put a lot of effort into it, and I think that the investigations that were undertaken vindicated that thought for the on-site, specifically for the on-site activities. That's the mining and the processing and everything that was done within the mining lease itself. There's a whole raft of very strict regulations that Jim is very familiar with. So we were very comfortable with that. We had appropriate specialised safety people on site. We had trained supervisors and a specific guy in charge of the site that was designated as the on-site boss there. So we thought we were in good shape. We had no serious injuries over a 12-year period, including during a significant construction program. And we had sightseeing executives and dedicated health safety and training coordinators and everything that you would expect with an operating sophisticated mine site. And in fact, the NHBR acknowledged and established comprehensive safety management system was actually in place, which encompassed what they call the chain of responsibility, which is one of the key aspects of this NHBR regulation. The public mine access road had been assessed as one of the highest risk areas for the company. It was unsealed, steep, windy, and had multiple single passing lanes. So we did understand that that was a risky area. Put effort into trying to manage that appropriately. Despite these measures, a fatality occurred on the off-site transport operations, and obviously this was unacceptable to all parties. The incident itself, I think you can see on page 6 there, there's a picture of an incline. You can see the road going up there. It doesn't look like an incline from this angle, but when you're on it, it's actually quite steep. truck was quite dog configured truck, so it was a tip truck with a 4-axle dog trailer on the back of it. It was halfway up that slope, and we're not quite sure what happened, whether the truck just stalled or the operator, the driver, missed a gear, but somehow the truck stopped and started to roll backwards, and the trailer in fact rolled off that ledge, which you can see on the side there, and pulled the truck over the edge and rolled it over. And the driver thought it appropriate to try and jump out of the moving vehicle as it was going backwards. So he died at the scene. This is about 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon, I think. And he was actually the owner of the business. So it was a tragic event, and it had a big impact on everyone involved in the operation. If we've been through fatality, it's really a terrible thing to go through. You've got to meet the family, understand what they're going through. The whole workforce knows this character. He's part of the local community, and it was very tough on everyone. So, of course, given that it was a fatality, the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator came in and did a very long, thorough investigation. The site haulage activities were shut down for a period of 6 weeks, and they, about 12 months later, came to us with their findings. So their investigation following the accident, they did this investigation. It was quite extensive and included physical inspection documents, and went through all our records and all our documentation on our safety procedures, both on site and with respect to haulage, although they were primarily concerned with the off-site haulage. They interviewed various people, including the site general manager and the safety officer there. Following that investigation, they charged the directors, myself and Jonathan, with failing to exercise due diligence to ensure the legal entity's compliance with their primary duty under section 26C. So 26C, and Liam will wrap this up and fill in the gaps in a legal sense, but basically there's a chain of responsibility for trucking or hauling any material, and it goes all the way from when the material is first picked up, all the way through various hands and warehouses and stoppages and until the end user. And so everyone in that, what they call the chain of responsibility, has various legal responsibilities to ensure that the trucking is fit for purpose and safe and doesn't endanger either the contractor themselves or the public using the roads. So it's fair to say the investigation didn't uncover a cause of the accident itself. We don't know whether the brakes failed or whether the guy fell asleep or that was inconclusive. But what they did find, and they alleged and charged us with as directors, was that we didn't undertake appropriate due diligence in the selection and appointment of that contractor, that he had in place all the appropriate safety documentation and processes to adhere to the NHVR regulations. So that's what we were charged with. We weren't charged with the incident itself. We were charged with not doing the appropriate due diligence. So theoretically, if they had come in and done a spot check, then the outcome of that theoretically would have been the same. The fact that we had an incident, a fatality, which instigated that investigation is almost a separate issue, if you like. So it's due diligence that we're focused on here, and the director's responsibilities to ensure that all contractors, whether arm's length or in-house contractors or whatever, owner operators or bigger companies, have all the requirements in place with respect to maintenance, fatigue, and all their other operational aspects to adhere to or to comply with NHVR regulations. So, with respect to the process with the NHBR charging Jonathan himself, we used MHR as our legal advisors. They were acting for us, and we ended up we got halfway through the court process, and we ended up settling with this and agreeing on this enforced undertaking process, which, as I understand, is a fairly common way to finish up a process that we went through. So the allegations,
Yeah, look, as sort of Mark went through, talking about the due diligence directors, and some of this might be a bit dry and thrown. I'll read to make sure I get the wording right because it's important that I do. But I think this is the part that I think the directors and especially directors who are involved within the heavy vehicle industry or have crossovers with it. This is the important part. And it's understanding what some of this due diligence, the spread of it, the detail of it, so that you can ensure that the businesses that you've worked with and the businesses you're involved with can ensure their compliance. So okay, so it was alleged that
Just to get me focused on this.
sure.
I think our biggest issue is the use of vehicles come onto site and take product away. Is this particularly relevant to that? Is that exactly?
Yeah, that's exactly what we
So if we were to see a driver who was drunk or a vehicle that wasn't roadworthy, we have an obligation to do something.
Absolutely.
That's okay. That's good.
And and as we'll go through some examples, it really even goes further from there.
Yeah.
And I think that should come out through some of the points that I raised.
Sorry, I just want to make
No,
sure
that was a great question.
I wasn't not the wrong way.
And look, it was something that, I must admit too, like when I looked at it, I think most people understand that when you engage a contractor, you can't contract out your obligations. But I suppose we, in terms of, looking at our site, we felt that we had a strong management system of the site. And probably in retrospect, that's what we realised, is that some of our engagement of our contractors under this legislation could have been stronger. I think that's some of the learnings that we'll talk about in due course. Okay, so it was alleged that the following measures were reasonably practical for us as a company to ensure that either the company or the contractor should have implemented. And that was identify, document, and educate contract drivers about the hazards and risks associated with its transport activities. Introduce and use appropriate resources to eliminate or minimise those hazards and risks, including maintain a system of checking that heavy vehicles tasked to perform its transport activities comply with relevant heavy vehicle standards. Conduct daily maintenance checks on vehicles. Keep accurate records and monitor driver work and rest times. Assess the fatigue of drivers before, during and after driving duties. Implement procedures to prevent recurrence if fatigue breaches were identified. Maintain an up-to-date register of drivers and vehicle records. Thirdly, provide adequate information, training, instruction, and supervision regarding how the heavy vehicle transport activities of the company, how the heavy vehicle transport activities of the company to contract drivers. And so specifically, it was alleged that the following measures were reasonably practical for the director to have implemented. And that was acquire and keep up-to-date knowledge about the safe conduct of the company's transport activities, namely around fatigue management and vehicle maintenance. Gain an understanding of the hazards, risks, including the public risk associated with fatigue management and vehicle maintenance. Ensure the company had used appropriate resources to eliminate or minimise those hazards and risks. And I think probably the key things you're seeing come out of here was around fatigue and maintenance.
And all those things make great sense for your own activities. But the point here is that these were a arm's length contractors' activities. We have the same obligations to do exactly the same thing with that. That I think is one of the key messages there.
Look, I think Mark talked a little bit about the impact, previously, and look, it was a significant impact. And Mark said anyone who's involved in that, it was a small community, it was a tight community in terms of the company. Mark and I, even though we were normally the directors, we actually worked within the business. We weren't the owners of the business as such, so we had a pretty close relationship with all the people. And I personally was involved with discussions with the driver who passed away. I knew he had a young family and all that sorts of things. So it really hit home strongly when we had this, and it really shook the business as a whole. But we took time to shut down just to let people process that what had happened, as well as do our own internal investigations. Yes, so we offer professional counselling services as you do to all of our employees to help them cope with it. And look, it wasn't the primary cause of why the business ultimately got put into administration. It had other operating issues, but it certainly had a big impact. We were at a time when we were starting to get on top of things, but we still had some hurdles to get through, and just having that stoppage and the effect on cash flow, the effect on morale, all sorts of things on the business. It certainly didn't help. I can't remember exactly how long we traded on for, but it must have been a couple of months after that incident, and we never really got back on track. The whole is subconscious to the principal contractor also had to find alternate work. So while it was an owner operated business, he engaged a number of subcontractors to provide the service as well. So they were naturally able to work as well. So we had an option but to engage an alternate service to keep the project running. Okay, the lessons, and this is quite detailed. The key concepts from the heavy vehicle national legislation is each party in the chain of responsibility for a heavy vehicle must ensure, so far as reasonably practical, the safety of the party's transport activities relating to the vehicle. Each party must, so as reasonably practical, eliminate public risks, and to the extent it's not reasonable to practically eliminate the risks, minimise the public risks. Ensure the party's conduct does not directly or indirectly cause or encourage the driver of the heavy vehicle to contravene NHVR law, the driver of the heavy vehicle to exceed speed limits, or another person, including another party in the chain of responsibility, to contravene the NHVR law. Executive due diligence. Exercising due diligence means gain and maintain knowledge about carrying out your transport activities safely. Understand the nature of transport activities, including the hazards and risks emanating from those activities to the company and its contractors. Ensure your company and your contractors have and use the resources needed to eliminate or minimise the hazards and risks created by its transport activities, and for that that information about hazards, risks, and incidents is received, considered, and responded to quickly. It is the company's responsibility to develop and implement reasonably practical ways to work with the contractor, and this is important to satisfactorily manage the risks of the transport activity. And then the example is fatigue management. So fatigue, we recognise fatigue management as obviously a key risk for not only the transport activities, but for the mine site as a whole. The management of fatigue in the offsite transport activities was relied on operators declaring that they were meeting their fatigue requirements. So we had a form that got filled out in every load. It was a declaration. But one of the things that we subsequently reviewed was that was the accuracy of those declarations, and showing that those records really reflected what was being signed off on. Setting up a community website for contractors to access safety information. All the sort of miners was another learning that we could have done there to improve the understanding of fatigue management within the contractors, subcontractors and employees. Some of the other, one of the other items that we looked at, and I think this is probably one of the I suppose practical applications that you can put in there to ensure that you actually have some visibility of fatigue management, is using technology, and that's now GPSs, it's in-camera dashes, and whether you have that directly in your own vehicles or whether it's the subcontractor, it's something to consider whether you put that into your contracts, that you require operators to have those facilities and to share them with you at timely fashion or request.
I also think, Jonathan, Will's chain of responsibility doesn't spell this out. I suspect that if the growers own the product that they're hauling, as opposed to selling it at the mine gate, then that will have an impact as well on their owners for responsibility. But the example that you quoted before, Jim, about having a truckie come on site and that he's under the influence of alcohol or drugs or not fit to drive, it's a great example where under this legislation, you have a responsibility to pull that truck driver up if he's carting from your property something that you've produced and sold, even if you've sold it at farm gate or still own it. That's a great example.
So the lessons in doing things better. I think everyone's got a copy, so I'll keep going. Next up on the screen for the people on link. Yeah, I think that, as Mark mentioned this earlier on, was the due diligence with engaging the contractor in the first place. That was one of the things that we identified, is that we need to ensure that the contractor not only understood and had a program for executing their obligations under the legislation, but we also were aware and had documentation for demonstrating that they were doing that. So that was one of the things, and I think, you know, engaging with essentially a small business, that's one of the things to really look at, to make sure they don't always have dedicated people, a safety officer and so forth. So they're often having to manage, you know, the business, you know, in the hours outside of, you know, operating the business as well. So it can be quite an onerous administration and upkeep of that documentation. We need to have more extensive and specific inductions, so that the drivers coming on site had a more detailed understanding of what our requirements were and the legislation as well. We had an induction program that was more tailored towards people working on the mine site than for those just visiting.
And just on that, one of the activities that we undertook was we created an induction video, which we made available to your group as well, which I think is quite useful and might be worth at least to watch. See what the other is.
And then this is where the responsibility under the HDNL falls outside of the control of the company. You look at alternative technologies and third-party verification to get yourself some comfort that the contractor is actually executing their applications as they've advised. And it's essential that the company develops a high level of in-house expertise with regarding HPL requirements when undertaking transport activities. And safety management systems need to be specifically tailored to the HPL requirements. Lessons doing things better. It's crucial that directors understand that due diligence, when referred to in this context, not the same as the due diligence referred to before buying something, entering a contract, or making a decision. It is specific, it is well defined, and it's well worth taking the time to have a look through that legislation to familiarise yourself with it. And it's also an ongoing obligation, not just something that's just done once. That's aspect. And that's that from my side of things.
That wraps up our formal presentation. We got any questions?
It's quite scary. It's really good.
It actually is quite scary, and this was the thing that we that a lot of small groups aren't aware of their requirements, and so I'm not sure exactly how your members go about transporting their produce, but I presume that it's a whole lot of small owner operators that come on, but they've been working with for some time, and take their product to the market. There is an element of chain of responsibility, and that should at least be understood by your members.
I think the real danger is not just product, and product's one thing. We have people coming in with pruning machines, we have people coming in to spread ag lime, people coming in doing all sorts of things where they're transporting equipment and their stuff onto our sites. The other thing I'm just sitting here thinking about, it's not unusual for me, and I'll probably be told I'm being silly. It's 11 o'clock at night, the bloody truck hasn't turned up to take the product away. And then I find out next morning, 1 o'clock in the morning, the truckie's come in using a forklift and loaded himself. And so you've got another issue there. And
Absolutely.
You can go and do read all about the HVNL, but there's a poultice of other issues out there that you really need to think about. I don't know if you can all get your mind around it, but it's certainly an issue.
There was a reasonable test, I think, in there.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah, Craig, I think has a question. Craig?
Yes, so I've just been going through all my RPAM stuff recently, and one of the things in there was to say that I had to give my induction. Now, I've got a very extensive induction for all my staff. It's done online now through Found You, but it's like a 38-page document with about 5 videos in it. And they are saying that I need to give that to every subcontractor before they enter the property. So, yeah, I'm going to be asking BFVG how we can practically manage it. You know, I've got 7 farms and I've got subcontractors coming and going on all the different properties all the time. How do we practically manage that everyone, that all the different subcontractors coming and going have had their inductions and we are keeping an eye on them? Because a lot of the time, the reason we get subcontractors in is because we can't be in 7 places at once. So I'd like to just find out how we can practically manage our responsibility as a director of this company that has these different properties.
The other thing too with that though is that a farm induction is a lot different than worrying about fatigue management and how someone's driving.
Someone else.
Like a truck, like we can do an induction on how to do safe on
Potential
truck.
boundary quite significantly. On your own farms, if you've got 7 of them, to a much greater extent than a public road that might be from here to Brisbane.
That's right. So how far does a grower have to go to make sure that they've covered everything when, you know, there are the ones that just come and, you know, do some pruning and stuff, but then they've got stuff that gets picked up.
I just want to quickly note that really more what he's talking about is work health and safety law, which is different to this one. So the way that the laws work together is that they actually sort of work side by side, particularly in relation to due diligence. You're supposed to do work health and safety officer due diligence, which is similar, and then you're supposed to do if there's transport activities going on, then you've got due diligence under that. With the work health and safety side of things, it's about reasonable, what's reasonable to do in circumstance. So you can always keep that in mind, but so you've got to make determinations of that as a business owner. What's going to be reasonable in the circumstances, taking into consideration cost and and other circumstances.
We don't determine that though. We're getting told that that's been determined for us. So like in that, this horrible, I'm so sorry this happened to you guys. That sounds terrible, but in that in the instance of a contractor taking your product to port, say they take my lychees or macadamias to market, that market's sometimes Perth. So if he flips around the Nullarbor on a truck that he left my place with a dodgy wheel bearing or something like, where is that? Is that we're gonna have an inquiry about that?
Well, look, yeah, so we're going to work out the safety law, what I was talking about there, which is more about reasonableness, and then you're coming to this law, which is the chain of responsibility, and the shared responsibilities that you have between people in the chain. So you, say, as the farmer, you're sending off the produce, and what's your response? You both have duties. He's the guy who's moving the material or produce, he's got duties as well. So you've got to really, what they're talking about here is that you have to sort of consult with one another through this process. You've got to make sure that he's safely doing what he's doing. And likewise, he should be doing the same for you. So it's a bit of a sort of a consultative process, which is also under work health and safety. So they are quite similar in those respects, but you do have to differentiate the obligations of the company or the business, whatever the legal entity is under this law, and the director, the executive due diligence. So the business has these obligations, whatever their safety obligations are. If they've got the primary obligation, which I'll quickly touch on, to make sure that there's safe transport activities, eliminate the risk or minimise the risk if you can't eliminate it, and then the director and the executive due diligence is a separate thing. So the directors are sitting on the outside here going, okay, is our company, am I making sure that our company is doing what it's supposed to be doing? So it's just keep those separate in your mind, because it's a personal duty on the executive and the director. So it's a personal thing.
But fatigue is also health and safety.
Well, it's both. Yeah, it's both. But it seems like they tend to be dealing with the transport fatigue under transport, things with transports, with the transport law and work health and safety, you know, if it was on the workplace and, you know, it wasn't really sort of associated with the transport activity, it might be dealt with under work health and safety. Would you say, Michael, this?
That's the line I'm saying. Work health and safety is everything on the farm, around the farm. National heavy vehicle legislation is once someone's in a heavy vehicle, then that legislation takes over. But they're the two pieces of legislation that are almost exactly the same.
There's still an element of really on the HPD.
A little bit in as well.
So if someone has your product on and has changed drivers 3 times and it's 3/4 of the way the person rolls over, and that person is found to be contravening fatigue, that's quite different, I suspect, to a guy that's not fit to drive leaving your site.
Yes. Yeah.
Influence and control, you know, what's reasonable, could you have known? You know, obviously there's all these things get taken into consideration under this concept called shared responsibility, which you referred about, because you're sharing the responsibilities and how you're going to arrange that. So both laws do take into consideration the circumstances.
But then just correct me if I'm wrong, but with due diligence under the VNL, the definition of executive is actually quite broad. So it picks up
Goes quite low.
from all the way down to supervision. So it isn't just directors or executives. It can be,
There's a recent case in Victoria, that truck that ran into that stationary police vehicle, killed 3 policemen. One of those supervisors, not the executive supervisor, went to jail, as I understand, and the second guy was issued a pretty hefty fine. So they were the ones that allowed that driver to get in that heavy vehicle and drive it while being completely unfit for doing that activity.
And that is sort of one of the bit of the differences with this law and the work health and safety law. The work health and safety law, this law seems to sort of have tentacles that go out a lot further than work health and safety laws. So, and even with the due diligence as well as you're explaining, work health and safety, you sort of get stuck around people that are able to, you know, influence the direction of the company. That's sort of where they are with due diligence. But this one, you know, it's sort of moving out to managers and things like that too. So, will we quickly duck through this, or any other questions?
This is not good. We had 45 minutes for this. I think we're just about up there.
Okay, yeah,
No, I think we want to continue.
yeah,
But I need to recognise at some point we're going to have to pull this up.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a great deal of interest in it, so I want to keep going with it. So.
okay.
But I'll probably ring a bell at some point.
Yeah,
We won't be offended. We've got dinner on the table. Yeah, in more detail, that's right.
Our message is kind of a one-off.
Yeah.
You take it as you get it and members do.
Yeah, so we were just discuss it, so we want to go ahead. Yeah, so the heavy vehicle national law, we might skip a bit of this. Regulates matters regarding heavy vehicles. It's a national law, so that helps, you know, deal with things across borders and things like that, which makes sense. And me and Michael were just talking that this has been a really good example for, I think, for people in this industry, because you could just replace coal with watermelons. And you're going to have similar obligations as the business and also as directors. We've already touched on work health and safety and HPNL and how due diligence, there's due diligence under both. And you're obligated to comply with both. If you can't comply with both, well, then work health and safety law does take precedence, but I don't think you know, the chances of that occurring are going to be very high. You can comply with both most of the time. One of the difficult things about this law is that there's a lot of different terminology. So I just want to quickly run through it. Legal entity is one. So that's corporations, partnerships, associations, things like that. That's the business. Executive, that's what they call officers, directors, even maybe going down to managers. The duty of the executive of a legal entity, that's what they call due diligence. The primary duty, now this is the main duty that anybody in the chain of responsibility, if you are categorised as being in the chain of responsibility, you have that primary duty. It's similar to the work health and safety primary duty. It's a little bit different. It pretty much just, we'll get into that a bit further on. Prescribed safety duties, they're specific duties that you might have, you know, make sure weight is right or dimensions are right, things like that. Transport activities, that's pretty much anything that involves a heavy vehicle transporting things. Chain of responsibility we'll touch on, and shared responsibilities we've touched on too. We'll go into a little bit more detail as we go through. Transport activities, they've got a definition of it. Contracting director employing a person to drive a heavy vehicle, consigning goods, scheduling the transport, packing goods, managing the loading of goods, loading goods, receiving goods. But it's not an exhaustive list, so it includes everything else. So it's very broad. It tries to capture as much as it possibly can. Yes.
So if I get a load of fertilizer in from Nutrien Ag, I unload that fertilizer, what's my responsibility after he leaves?
After he leaves,
No different, whether he's got a full load or an empty load.
I've taken my load off and so I've still got that responsibility.
Until when?
If he's driven 10 hours to get there and has to drive 10 hours home, and you know that, or should have known that, or should have made that inquiry, yeah, you've got responsibilities.
So it's not just going off site, it's coming on the site as well. Sorry.
that's a good question. So the chain of responsibilities, as we just discussed, makes parties other than just the drivers responsible for the safety of the heavy vehicle. So they're trying to get everybody along the way. You've all got a duty here, the primary duty. You've all got the primary duty to ensure that you eliminate risk pretty much. This means that most entities from the business that employs driver to the business that sends or receives goods is accountable for the safety of the heavy vehicle. Now, the chain of responsibility is defined. You are a party if you're an employer of a driver, you're a prime contractor, an operator, scheduler of the vehicle, consigner of goods, consignee, packer, the same type of things we discussed before, a loader of any goods, an unloader of any goods. And so you can see where they could, if you've all got duties, okay, how are we going to manage, how are we going to manage who does what? That's sort of where this shared responsibilities concept comes in. So it's shared. The level and nature of the party's responsibility depends on various factors, including the ability to control associated risks. Obviously, if someone's in a better position to do it, well, then they're going to have, I guess, the greater responsibility to ensure that's complied with. But it still doesn't necessarily mean that the other party is going to be sort of free of it as well. So you just always take the approach that we've got a duty here. We need to make sure that it's being complied with. We've already touched on the primary duty. So the wording is to eliminate public risks to the extent if it's not reasonably practical to do that, then you have to minimise. So you'll be familiar with that with work health and safety, similar concept, eliminate, isolate, you go all the way down. And then also to ensure that you don't directly or indirectly ask people to sort of breach the law and things like that. Like you were saying about if you had told that guy, I just get the forklift and unload it yourself, well, obviously you've contravened the primary duty there if you were to do something like that. And in addition to the primary duty, there's specific other duties that we spoke about. So depending on certain activities and things like that. So you've got to make sure that the primary duty and these other duties are being complied with from a business perspective and then from a due diligence perspective as an executive. Now we'll go to this, the actual wording of the due diligence duty. Section 26 says, if a legal entity has a safety duty, an executive of the legal entity must exercise due diligence to ensure the legal entity complies with the safety duty. So I think we've already spoken about that, but basically that's a personal duty on the executives. As we said, it could go down to managers, depending on circumstance, to ensure that your business is complying with all safety duties. It's pretty simple, and if you think about it that way, you've just got to make sure that everything's being done, in accordance with the relevant law.
Sorry, can I just stop you there?
Yes.
This is so unbelievable. I think that that Australians should buy all their food out of China because I'm not going to bloody grow it anymore. If we've got to check on every single thing we do, we'll spend all our time trying to find out what the latest law is and won't have any time to farm. So I'm finding this unbelievable that I have to have the responsibility to find out where the bloody truck driver has come from in what state when they're delivering my fertilizer. Honestly,
that is a common common reaction. We do have some strategies though. I don't know whether you're presenting on those strategies, Liam, but
Not really,
this due diligence concept, we've got some we've got some strategies around that, which doesn't mean that no one's going to have an accident, but it does mean that your personal liability may be reduced significantly.
Oh, well, that's great because honestly, there's a for sale sign going up on all my properties unless we've got something like that. No, seriously, stuff it. This is the amount. I've got 5 accreditations I have to do just to sell my bloody fruit into Woolworths. 5 different accreditations, and now you're lumping this on top of it as well. Seriously, it's unbelievable. Sorry, I'll shut up now.
Hey, Craig, what I'm planning on doing at the end of this, we'll take an item in the agenda and we'll talk about what it is we want to do going forward, whether there's anything we can do, but what it is we might want to do rather than try and debate it all here now. We're trying to get a few facts together, gurgle it around our heads, and then start to think about what could we do. We may have to get people back. We may have to think about, 5 key issues we've got to do. So that's where I want to head to, Craig, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Okay. So yeah, it's the way it's perceived is about being proactive to make sure the legal entity of your business is compliant. Personal duty, as we discussed, that means that they come after you personally. It's separate to the company. They'll likely come up to the company too if there's been a significant breach, and also they'll have a look and see if you did your due diligence. The current maximum penalty there, 300,000 and or 5 years imprisonment. And one important thing to remember, it's not like the way these laws have changed now. It's not a delegable duty, so you can't. You might have employed a work health and safety officer to deal with work health and safety. That doesn't change the fact. It might help you comply with your obligation because you can go to them, hey, tell me about how, what's going on here. Tell me about what you've been doing with the contractors coming on site. What our process is there, and that's part of due diligence, doing that sort of thing. So they can help with that, but you're still ultimately responsible. In practical terms, this is what due diligence looks like. This is the guidance, getting and maintaining knowledge about carrying out transport activities, understanding the nature of the business. I think you guys might have touched on this. Ensuring the business has and uses resources needed to eliminate or minimise the risk. So that's that primary duty aspect, and maintaining evidence of due diligence inquiries. Now we put that on the bottom there because that's something that you're going to have to have. You have to something to show, because you might be doing a really great job, and that's great. But it is difficult to if you have nothing, it's difficult to prove that you've been doing a great job. So it is important to have some mechanism in your systems for being able to show that you actually demonstrate what you've been doing. Now, just for some final thoughts, it's not a ticker box system, though they can be useful if you can set them up that are specific to your business. Particularly the regulator suggests that it's more of an attitude towards compliance and should always be adaptive. So it's not something, it's like work health and safety. It's not a static thing that you've just got your induction and you use that for 5 years. The induction, it has to continually be updated as the risks and hazards and things in the work change and the machinery changes, etc. So it's similar in that respect. Corporate systems like a due diligence manual may assist the executive in compliance, but ultimately the main thing is that you're actually personally taking those steps to make sure that there's compliance. And we've already spoken about delegation. Do we have any brief questions, further questions about just the legal structure of how it plays out, or about whether you think maybe you are captured by the law or not captured by the law, things like that? I think we've sort of pretty much explained that most of the members are going to be if they're involved in transporting produce and things back and forth.
So who is the regulator of that?
National Heavy Vehicle Regulator, NHVR.
So it's a department like the mining regulator.
Like Work Health and Safety Regulator, like Mining Regulator. They've got their own budget and prosecutor and all that sort of stuff.
And rights of access, they can go anywhere they like, speak to whoever they like.
Yeah, they've got unlimited rights, just like work health and safety. You don't realise that they've got more rights than police do to access your property. Automatic right of entry.
Okay, well, thank you for your time, thank you for allowing us to there. Yeah.
Just a quick round, I'll let them leave without any other questions. Give you a chance, we've got 30 seconds. All right, thanks very much, guys.
Thanks so much.
We're having a bit of a discussion.
Yeah, happy to.
And we may well ask somebody to come back.